I work for an organization based in New York City, and I think that you will find it is particularly unique in the role that it plays in planning for the metropolitan region. And so what I'll be talking about today will focus on civic participation in the planning process, the identification and articulation of public benefit from projects, and the evolution of plans over time as participation is incorporated into the design vision. I will start by describing a little bit about the organization and how we have functioned in the metropolitan region, and then focus in on two key redevelopment areas in New York City. So first, the context for metropolitan New York. We have Manhattan and New York City, and an entire metropolitan region of approximately 23 million people. Yet the governance for this region is very fragmented. It is divided amongst 3 states, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. Within those states, we have 31 county governments. Within those counties, we have 695 municipal governments, and while the city of New York is geographically large, you can see that the majority of other municipalities are quite small. And then we have 10 metropolitan planning organizations that strategize for investments in transportation infrastructure. So you can imagine, given that all of these agencies and governments are run by either have political representation or political appointments, there is a constrained geographic purview and a constrained temporal purview. You have many entities looking at one small physical piece of the region and looking only out on a horizon of perhaps 2-4 years, 10 at the most. So within that context, in the 1920s, Regional Plan Association was established by a group of business and civic leaders to be the non-governmental entity to look at the entire metropolitan region as one region, and to look beyond political horizons to identify those strategies to maintain the economic competitiveness and the quality of life in greater New York for the next 25, 30, 50 years. To that end, we created 3 regional plans. The first in 1929, the second in 1968, and the third in 1996, that each embody our research and recommendations for key land use decisions, infrastructure investments, economic development priorities, landscape preservation for the metropolitan region. And because we do not have any status as a government body, we are a not-for-profit, non-governmental entity, we have to rely on our participatory planning, our stakeholder engagement, the quality of our research, and our independence to advance our concepts and to get them incorporated into the official decision-making process of the various levels of government that cover the metropolitan region. And we have been quite successful. Beginning in the 1920s, the focus of the first regional plan for New York and its environs and its region focused on the large interjurisdictional infrastructure projects that were not within the purview of any one municipality, within any one state, and had payback periods beyond the cycle of any one political leadership. Our recommendations resulted in such investments as JFK Airport, the George Washington Bridge, the interstate park system, the highway system. Those investments that enabled the metropolitan region to prosper over a generation, but could not have been implemented if each government was looking just within their own borders or for payback within their own administration. Now, much of that original focus was about relieving pressure off of the core of the metropolitan region. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, living conditions in Manhattan were not of the highest quality. We had overcrowding, poor living standards, based on the demand and the infrastructure investments that had been made in the past, all pointing towards one point in the region. So much of those early investments were meant to relieve pressure from Manhattan and push growth elsewhere into the region. And so you can see in the 1930s, growth was concentrated in the metropolitan core and in a handful of satellite cities around the regional rail network. You can even see the rail lines, the linear corridors leading out from Manhattan. Perhaps many of the recommendations were too successful because the impact across the metropolitan area, while it had some short-term benefit in enabling prosperity in the middle half of the 20th century, the results we began to see in the end of the 20th century many of the negative externalities that had been resulted from decentralization. And I think of these in kind of three categories. There was the loss of critical landscapes, landscapes that were critical from their ecological value, water resources, landscapes that had aesthetic value, that helped you visually define the region, the mountainside, the bay, the harbor, and also from a recreational standpoint, losing opportunities for open space near developed areas. And then finally, agricultural, necessitating by using up farmland for development, we necessitate greater importation of food goods. But also it created a dependency on the automobile. For many trips, there was little option because so much of the growth had taken place beyond walking distance of the transit network, despite it being the largest transit network in North America. And then finally, an over-reliance on a single product. And when I say product, I mean product as a community type. By developing almost exclusively office parks and single-family houses on large lots, we had created an oversupply of one product and an undersupply of any other alternative, resulting in a dramatic loss of affordability. So there's been a lot of talk today about housing affordability, and one of the main justifications for creating affordable housing or workforce housing in the metropolitan region today is to create an incubator, a housing ladder, so that there is an opportunity for young professionals and young families to move into your community, so that when the older families and older households are ready to sell their house, there is demand, local demand, to buy that product of which we have an oversupply. So we have a very imbalanced housing market currently. And then looking forward, we recognize that should those trends continue, we would be in dramatic, challenging situation. So we look to have centralized decentralization. relieve pressure off the core, but concentrated in a series of regional centers networked to one another with the transit network and networked to the main growth pole in Manhattan. And so fundamental to achieving this is first and foremost the transit investments, so that there are sustainable transport options to get between the centers and one another and between the centers and Manhattan. But evolving the transit network, currently the transit system is mostly designed to bring people to Manhattan. So each station is surrounded with acres and acres or hectares and hectares of surface parking. So that suburban residents can drive, park their car, get on the train, and go to Manhattan. Now we need to make targeted investments to enable the transportation system to serve not as a commuter feeder to Manhattan alone, but rather as a networking tool to integrate the satellite centers with one another, so that they evolve from independent nodes into neighborhoods, essentially, of a common metropolis. And I will focus then, so in networking together the centers, we do not lose focus still on the core, recognizing that the role of Manhattan in the region is still primary and paramount. And so I'll focus on two key redevelopment areas in the core, Lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center, and the Far West Side. So first, Lower Manhattan, of course, World Trade Center, freed up, I will say, an opportunity, perhaps to correct some of the mistakes made in the past. When the World Trade Center was built, it was 10 million square feet of office space that sucked up all of the demand for office in Lower Manhattan for a generation. They had just begun to be commercially viable just before 2001. And they created a barrier in the neighborhood. It was a project rather than an impetus for neighborhood regeneration. So we have now an opportunity to conceptualize it, again, not as replacing 10 million square feet on one site, but identifying a strategy to utilize the site to catalyze the regeneration of Lower Manhattan. And the initial plans, unfortunately, by the government entity were just to replace 10 million square feet on the site in a project. And we identified, much as the conversation here has been about Nangang, who are the stakeholders? The property owner and the property leasee, yes, but not only. The neighborhood of Lower Manhattan, yes, but not only. The city, yes, but not only. And we've talked today about the future residents and the future tenants as being also stakeholders. So we brought together, we as a non-profit, non-governmental civic entity, brought together approximately 7,000 people representing an accurate breakdown of the geographic distribution and the ethnic and socioeconomic distribution of the region together to assess the government project and create a framework for how investments and redevelopment could act as regeneration. And it resulted in a series of policies, a policy framework, which caused the government to go back to the drawing board, create a design competition, and meet a set of objectives for flexibility, for permeability of the site, for mixed use, a series of objectives that will not be met on the site alone, but the redevelopment of the site can serve to play a role in meeting those objectives within the district and within the city. Similarly, the Far West Side, this is Pennsylvania Station, Madison Square Garden. This is what we call the Hudson Rail Yards, the last large redevelopable land, Javits Convention Center, and underutilized district on the west side of Manhattan. Similarly, government's first proposal was a project designed to meet a single objective: football stadium meant to attract the Olympics. A one-shot silver bullet dropped out of the sky, no context. We do it here because we have the land, we own it, and we want to meet an objective. And we went and did research and outreach and stakeholder engagement that demonstrated how the site could be utilized not just to meet one objective, but to meet multiple objectives, to connect the city to the waterfront, to create an housing incubator for the city, to create an extension of the Midtown Business District, to expand office opportunities, to do what the city does best, which is create more fabric, not one-off projects isolated from their context. And so in the end, based on the research and the demonstrated opportunity that existed in the neighborhood, the city went back to the drawing board, engaged a broader group of stakeholders, created a design competition, and resulted in a development program that builds on the inherent attributes of the neighborhood and of the location and of its accessibility, rather than a distinct independent project without much context. So I will leave it there because we are time constrained, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people have following the discussion, and hopefully the panel will continue these concepts. Thank you.